In OOPS, you would have very well learned about cohesion and coupling. While whatever you decide or to build and build has to be cohesive, it cannot be very tightly coupled to each other. That wouldn't be a very good service-oriented architecture. So you have to reduce the coupling. So the high-level modules should not depend upon the low-level modules, and abstractions should not depend on details. Now this is the basics for dependency injection, and this is called dependency inversion principle. This is a programming design principle. So your high-level modules must not depend upon the low-level modules. Inversion of control. This is another programming design paradigm that you'll have to learn. Inversion of control, the term inversion of control, now just see, inversion of control. So there's a natural way in which things are controlled, but you'll have to inverse it. So inversion of control refers to a programming style where the framework or the runtime controls the program flow. So where does this happen? Now, even if you take web forms, it is your ASP.NET framework that is controlling the program flow. Your page lifecycle is determined by the framework and not dependent upon the kind of code you write there. Of course, you can do a little bit of response.redirect and all those stuff here and there, but then by and large, the page load cycle and then the way the page is disposed of, all that happens depending upon the framework. So it is a framework that drives the thing. So as a matter of fact, all frameworks that developed on top of the .NET framework will use inversion of control principle. So okay, there is a dependency inversion, there is an inversion of control. Now how do these things match together? Now dependency injection is a design pattern that helps us develop decoupled or loosely coupled code. And this is a design pattern. If you code according to this design pattern, it's called dependency injection. Okay. Now there are a lot of containers called IOC containers, which are called inversion of control containers, which are done as third-party tools and given to us. Now if we are able to use those containers within our code, we will be able to achieve dependency injection in a very easy way. That's how it stands. Okay, so first there is a dependency inversion principle. So if you look at this, it's kind of like you first have the dependency inversion principle. You have the dependency inversion principle, and this is a programming design paradigm. So this is a concept. And then you have your inversion of control, IOC as it's called in short, and this is also another principle. Now you have dependency injection, which is a design pattern which depends on the dependency inversion principle. Now dependency injection can be done either by ourselves, we can begin to do dependency injection totally by ourselves, or you can use something called IOC containers, which are like third-party tools which will make dependency injection far easier for you. And what is that we will see in this context? Now, where is dependency ever there in our code? Okay, so let me go over here. So I will keep this. This is where I have the dependency injection. So let me go over here, open it up, and open the sample that we've been doing, which is our MVC restaurants as we left it off that day. So here, if we were to run our code, if you remember where we left off, we did several things like the restaurant controller, the reviews controller, and we did all of those. If you take our basic home controller, what we would do here is we would be displaying a list of restaurants over here with the number of reviews for each restaurant. So that's pretty much what we did. We'd use the entity framework, and therefore we had all of these things up and running. So it's taking a while. Before that, I'll just show you, just to quickly recap where we were. So I had this piece of code, and this is the DB context. And what our index method would do is our index method would go to the DB context and go to the restaurants table and get a list of restaurants and order them in a descending order based on the number of good reviews. So the one with the maximum number of good reviews gets featured first, and one with the least gets featured towards the end. And this is what we ended up with. Now, if you could just take a closer look at the code that is available here, you'd see that you are instantiating MVC restaurant DB, which is a DB context. It's okay, let's instantiate this. But no, this is a low-level class. Now what you're doing here is you're saying my home controller has just gotten totally dependent upon my MVC restaurant DB. So it's totally dependent because you're instantiating it within the class. Now how do I decouple it? You can decouple it if you're going to pass MVC restaurant DB as a parameter. But still you're not decoupling it. You're still saying it's MVC restaurant DB and you're passing that as a parameter. So it will still have to be a class of type MVC restaurant DB. Now let's think a little bit more, where we will say that I don't even want to do this. What I want to do is I want to pass an interface which is of type IMVC restaurant DB. So that's what we will set out to do. Now what I'll do is I've been running this application. Now let me keep this application as it is for whatever it is worth, because we'll have to come back to bundles where we will need all of this. So what I want to do over here is go over here. I want to copy out this, and what I want to do here is I want to create something for a custom controller factory. You might think, why am I saying custom controller factory wherein I am discussing about dependency injection? You will understand that custom controller factory by itself is a dependency injection principle. The only difference being that we implement the dependency injection all by ourselves as opposed to having a container. So what we'll do is we are learning dependency injection, in the process of which we will do custom controller factory. So by means of which both of them will actually get completed. So I want to be able to open this. So this is just a copy of the application that we've been doing until day 3. So I've opened up this application. Now what I want to do over here is I've already gotten a sample created and kept, because for want of time, otherwise I'd end up doing all the code again, which is not something I want to do. Now what I would want to do here is look at this class over here. Now I have an MVC restaurant DB. Now I want this MVC restaurant DB. it already inherits from the DB context class. But in addition to that, I want it to inherit from the IMVC restaurant DB, which is an interface. And what does this contain? Now this IMVC restaurant DB follows the repository pattern where it has got a method for add, update, remove and save changes, and it's got methods for CRUD and a method to display the list. So that's what it's got. Now all of you know that an interface just contains the declaration of the methods, it doesn't have the implementation. In your MVC restaurant DB, what I choose to do is I choose to implement this method. And what would I do in the process of implementing these methods? Now when I say I implement iQueryable of T, I return a set. In add method, I add to the set. In my update method, I change the entry API's entity state to modified, and in the remove, I remove it from the set. And of course, I have a save changes where I do a save changes. And you know that when you call the save changes, it gets saved to the database. So this is something that I know would happen. And let me do this. This is a sample code snippet, so I will clean up the code and do exactly this for you. So let me take it in steps. Let me first introduce an interface. So I go over here. This is, so I want to open up MVC restaurant DB, and in my MVC restaurant DB I want to have an interface. So this is the interface that I would have, and what I want to be able to do is, I know I'm inheriting from DB context, I also want to implement this interface. So I do this, and when I implement this interface, I know that in addition I would have to implement all the methods that are there in the interface, because that's what an interface does to you. An interface is a rule, it's a contract, so you will have to abide by that, and you'll have to implement all the methods in that interface. So I have done this. Now why on earth am I doing this? I know that my home controller is tightly coupled to my MVC restaurant DB, and I want to remove that dependency, so I want to pass it as a parameter. Now where would I pass it as a parameter? Okay. Well, your controller has got, of course, a default parameterless constructor. What you're going to do is you're going to give a parameterized constructor to this home controller. So that's what we're going to do. Let me do that. So I open up this home controller and I say I want to do something like this. Now before doing this, I want to do a few changes over here. What I want to do is, remember this is not my original project, this is only for implementing the custom controller factory. I don't want to have the pain of doing this in the reviews controller and the restaurant controller, therefore I'm actually going to delete them. So let me delete it. I don't want it in my restaurant controller. And I get into my views, and in my views, okay, I don't even have the controller, so my views can be sitting there, and they will still not cause a huge problem for me, so let them just be there. I'm not going to, or you can choose to delete your views as well, so it's left to you. Let us see if this actually compiles. It will not compile as of now because you're saying that your MVC restaurant DB has got changes now. Okay, let me remove the clutter so that it's just, so I'd go over here and my let me delete this. Let me delete this as well. I don't want all of this, so I've cleaned it up a little bit. Now what I want to do is I want to have a parameterized constructor. So I've got a sample code. I'm doing this. So what I'm saying is I'm not instantiating my MVC restaurant DB inside the class. Instead, I am passing a parameter of IMVC restaurant DB. Now what would be the practical use of this? Now one practical use of this that I can immediately think of is, say for example you want to make a test. You want to test your project. And when you would like to test your project, you want to have the ability to have different data sources to test it. So it would be easy to decouple the data source and keep it as a parameter. So this very often happens in a trust-driven development environment where people say that you must be able to have separate database for tests because you don't like to um, actually modify the development database and clean it up right after tests. So here it's already started giving me errors, and that's because my DB restaurants is now DB query of restaurants. I don't have anything else here, and that's fine. Now let me see if I'm actually able to compile the code.